is not on the agenda. So if you're here to speak about an agenda item, the one we have, we'll have a public hearing during that time, but this is if you want to address any other issue that you feel you'd like to talk to us about. Going once, twice, we're moving on. New business, 317 Central Avenue, site plan for a mixed-use commercial and residential building. Staff want to give us a Reader's Digest version of your report and recommendations?
Sure. Basically just going to read what's on, Basically going to read what's on the screen. We have an applicant who is requesting site plan approval to construct 4,890 square foot mixed-use commercial residential building on the corner of Central and 13th, the southeast corner. This would be a single two-story residential unit on the second floor and a portion of the third floor, and then a not yet determined use of the commercial portion on the first floor by a not yet determined business of some sort. They're recommending site improvements, including 5-foot sidewalk from the building to the city's existing sidewalk and parking area. 3 parking spaces are proposed along essentially the east perimeter or the east side of the property, other than some green space between the parking area and the existing church. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Well, the basic recommendation of staff is approval of the site plan, including the requested waiver, and the waiver pertains to the south side of the property adjoining a residential lot. Ordinarily, the zoning would require a 10-foot setback in that environment. The plan calls for a 4.2-foot setback with a full screen of arborvitae between this property and the adjoining property.
And this particular lot is zone C1, commercial.
It's zone
But this is
C1,
not a
yep.
rezoning, correct?
Correct.
All right. All right. Is the applicant here? Name and address, please.
My name is Becky Page. I'm with Holland Engineering. Do you need my address for?
You can give business address, is fine.
Okay, 220 Hoover Boulevard, Holland. With me tonight is Max Nykirk. He's with Lakewood Construction, the architect on the project. Staff report explains the project fairly well. Just want to highlight a few additional items. Regarding the waiver and the parking, the existing parking lot on the existing developed site is closer to those neighbors to the south than what we are currently proposing in the proposed improvements. In addition, with the traffic flow through there is a one-way traffic flow. It has the 16-foot minimum required width for travel lane. We are lining up with the existing curb cut that's on the road for Central Avenue. People will enter through Central Avenue and exit out of 13th Street, so all headlight shine would be to the north, away from the property, to the south. In addition, we do have that tree buffer requirement. So just a couple of things to highlight in that area.
North and to the east, headlight glare.
North and to the east, correct.
Okay.
So, and I think that there's an existing church building to the east. So, and then I think it was brought up during the work session that there was talk of the infill requirement. And we did have a pre-application meeting with staff. They did say that one approval does not require the other. So they are separate approval processes through that. So we do plan on submitting for the infill approval, but they did say that we could submit for site plan first. So if you have any questions, we are here to answer them.
Are there any questions for the applicant?
Yeah, I have a question about the waiver here. Have you looked into what it would take to put in a new driveway instead of using the existing curb cut?
I know the existing curb cut was what was installed by the city when they redid Central Avenue. So we have not talked with Brian White as to whether or not we could adjust that further north, but that does obviously limit, we're lining up with that north line of that existing driveway. And so it's currently actually a wider driveway, and we're reducing the width of that driveway as well.
Okay. And for this commercial space, do we have an idea about its intended use yet?
I don't think if you want to address that? Yep.
Hi, Max Nykerk, Lakewood Construction. Working with the client, he does not have an intended use for that. We've talked through the options. We originally had proposed 2 tenants, but he wants minimal traffic, minimal use. He has intended or expressed to me he will be very selective on the use of that space. He doesn't want a coffee shop with high traffic. He wants something more in the commercial realm that has limited day-to-day operation since he is living above that space.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? No.
Staff, maybe you could illuminate us as to what uses are allowed on the first floor in a C1 zone district.
It's a pretty long list. Sorry. It's a lengthy list. I can pull that up if you would like.
Give us the flavor of it.
Well, it does allow things like coffee shops or restaurants. Everything from, if I'm recalling correctly, like I think one of the examples that the client or the architect mentioned is perhaps like an investment advisor or something of that sort, a small
Office.
office-based business.
Retail is allowed?
Retail
Good-
would be
goods-
allowed.
Goods and services?
Yep. I do believe, though, that based on use, the parking requirements differ. So the parking that was, the amount of parking that was suggested in the plan assumes a more generic office-based business, not a business that would have a high frequency.
Okay.
The parking requirements, just to add to that, we did go with one of the higher parking requirements for a commercial type use,
Okay.
just to give some flexibility in
All
there.
right.
I can read a little bit of a longer list if you like. A bank or financial institution, barber or beauty shop, dry cleaning, retail, shoe repair, arts and crafts studio, arts and crafts school, music dance studio. It's a,
The potpourri.
yep.
All right. Okay. And what they put in there is really going to be limited by the parking that particular use requires.
That would be my understanding. I suppose that if something were suggested that was outside of that list, then that would come back for permitting that would require, maybe some different plans of some sort, other than the structure itself.
All right. Any other questions for the applicant?
Yeah, I got one more. If the waiver was denied, do you have a backup plan? Or what's the other solution?
I guess we don't have another option at this time. We would obviously consider some other options and probably work with the city staff to determine those options.
Okay, thanks.
Did you have a conversation with Brian White about the curb cut?
We didn't talk to Brian White. He was unable to attend the pre-application meeting when we
Okay.
did meet, and didn't mention otherwise. I know that as far as pavement and, knowing that 13th Avenue is a fairly recently reconstructed roadway, he made it very clear he didn't want cut into the pavement areas.
Correct. All right, thank you. This does require a public hearing. I'm going to open that public hearing now. We ask that you come to the microphone to speak and that you state your name and address. We generally give about 5 minutes for you to speak. If you're going someplace that makes sense, we're a little lenient on that. If you're not, then we shut you down to 5. So whoever would like to come on down, who gets to be first? I assume you're not all here waiting for the other guy. You've done this before, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Paul Trapp, 34 East 13th. As people who've been living in the neighborhood for decades, we have been in a long, difficult struggle with intentions of predatory landlords, people with different visions, city policies, city lack of policy, for a whole series of things. The sense of the fighting to maintain a sense of the neighborhood. And that is again being threatened by a structure that really does not look and fit like a neighborhood structure. Because it is a commercial structure, we're probably limited by the infill ordinance, which would require the place to look like a home or to fit into the neighborhood. This is a very modern-looking building and very different than anything in the neighborhood at the present time. Specifically, besides the concern with the infill and with all the things that would be if this was a residential lot rather than an odd commercial lot in the middle of nowhere, we would be more protected. We are not. Specifically concerned, too, about the appearance as you look down the street. There's a 5-foot setback here, where most structures have a setback between 12 and 20 feet. So when you look down 13th Street, when this thing is constructed, you're going to have one big solid wall. That's all you'll see as you look down the street. It'll visually change the whole intent of the appearance. Also, looking at the site, if it were a neighborhood site, and I don't know how this is affected by a commercial site, in a residential site, you're only allowed to pave half of the backyard. And looking at the plan, it's substantially more than half that's being put under concrete. Concerned aesthetics, but also for drainage, for absorption of water, and just generally the environment. To have a community that's all pavement is detrimental to the community. So we realize our hands are tied, but we wanted to express our concerns. The person has a commercial lot. It apparently little concern for the neighborhood, and we're stuck again.
Thank you. Question for staff. I didn't go through all the big sheets in the back of the site plan. Is there a drainage plan attached to that, I assume?
believe there is. I just looked at it. I can read it, or I can pull it up on screen.
Well, those are internal drains in the parking lot running down to the storm sewer?
I believe
Or is there a
so.
catchment in between?
Yep.
Okay. So the drainage has been looked at. How much comfort that gives you, I don't know. But
It'll drain, but there's no natural drainage. The water's running away. There's no absorption of water.
correct,
Or less absorption of water.
correct. Is there anyone else to speak to this application? Come on down.
Hi, Laura Halsey, 1092 Alden Court, but I own 321 Central, which is next door. I'm not a predatory landlord. I think I'm a nice landlord. I usually rent to Hope students, and it's gone well. My question is about the landscape barrier, if that's the right term. Just wondering, I planted, and I don't know if it's gonna work, some arborvitae in the back. When the gentleman whose name escapes me bought the property, he had that big tree taken down. The tree was too big, it was overgrown, but my house there lost every scrap of shade. And it's an old house, it has no air conditioning, so that was a bummer. I get site improvement. But these arborvitae and the other plants that were proposed that I'm not familiar with, I'm wondering if there are regulations. Does it have to be a certain size? Is it gonna be like a 12-inch thing that takes 10 years to grow taller? That's just my question about that border area and kind of the aesthetics for my my renters there.
The staff, or perhaps Andy? have
No, I
any-
think I read in the plan, it calls out 4-foot tall arborvitae's to be planted, and they'll grow to be 12 feet tall.
Right, I just don't want to know what the timeline
Yeah, they'll be higher than headlights to begin with, so I think that's the goal right now.
All right,
So they'll be like 4 feet tall to start.
What is the other, can you describe the other kind of plant? I don't know.
I think, I don't have that one up in front of me, but I think there's service berries, a couple different types of maple trees and some ginkgo trees in the back to the east side of the lot. They'll grow, the street trees will grow 40, 50 feet tall probably. They'll be 25 feet across. The ginkgos in the back to the east will be similar in height, but they will be less dense. If you're familiar with what's down 9th Street, probably between River and College or Columbia, there's a lot of ginkgo trees on that block. They're kind of stringy looking trees. They're unique, and they're calling for 2 of them there. Yeah, the landscape plan isn't bad. Looks pretty good.
Okay. Anyone else like to speak to this application? This is your opportunity. Hi.
I'm Marilyn Wickens, and I live at 3 West 13th. And I'm a tree person. I have several comments, and I'll just read them because I wrote them down. Number 1, I'm opposed to reducing the south setback requirement from 10 feet to 4.2 feet. 4.2 feet is too narrow to provide meaningful and aesthetically pleasing landscape separation between the existing house and the new proposed parking lot. The landscape strip should include evergreen and deciduous trees tall enough to visually separate the upper level windows, all residential use, on both properties. Selected species should be resistant to road salt, which arborvitae is not, and the prevailing westerly winds. A 10-foot planting area allows for at least some landscape design and does not have to look like a thin row of bushes. I comment on your remarks about those arborvitaes. It's very hard to get them to grow in the wind by the street, and you have only to look at the Centennial Inn Bed and Breakfast. They have several arborvitaes in about the same location as they're proposed here, and they're thin and they have salt damage on them. They don't look too bad right now because we haven't had enough snow to get really bad salt damage. I'm opposed to retaining the existing barbershop parking space on the east side of Central Avenue. This is the only street parking on the east side of Central, south of 12th Street. It conflicts with the bicycle driving lane. On-site parking should meet the needs of this new proposed building. Canopy trees or street trees on both 13th and Central Avenue should be maximized and planted as close as the city allows. There are no utility poles on either street, so the appearance of this corner will be enhanced by substantial plantings. Selected species should be road salt tolerant, grow to be tall trees, and have good fall color. The proposed building will be situated across on both streets from historic buildings. In order to respect the setting of these buildings, some landscaping should be between the new building and the existing sidewalks, as it is along all of the buildings from 10th Street all the way to 16th Street. There's a landscaping setback, tree lawn on the outside of the sidewalk. So I think that should continue. And it's difficult to say how large it must be to be effective. But if you think about European cities where, you know, you have these close by entryways, I think the landscaping could be quite small, but still begin to feel like a transitional area between the downtown and residential. The plantings on the east landscape strip should be mixed, should be tall and medium species so that the proposed parking lot and residents will be good neighbors for each other, especially the second floor windows. The residence in the new building is on the second floor, and the church has second floor windows, and it just seems like it would be nice to have some height in there. And with a 10-foot wide space, I think you could get that. They might have to be columnar trees to fit in there, but it could be done nicely. And then I have a couple comments for the developer. The flat roof on this building would be a perfect place to put some solar panels and would be kind of a model to show that what could be done in the city of Holland now that we're in a climate crisis. Also, I thought that some kind of pervious pavement would be a good idea on at least part of the proposed parking lot, so that we get some recharging of the aquifer and not running all that gray water into the sewer system. And we're seeing more rain with the climate crisis. The warmer air is absorbing more moisture and carrying bigger rains to us year-round. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could staff provide some explanation or illumination relative to the barber shop parking space?
The one on
You mean the one that's in now?
Central?
Yeah, that's included in, they're including that in their parking requirement?
No, I think it's a redesign.
Okay.
So if you look at the screen that's still up, the intended new parking, the three proposed lots or spots are along that,
Parallel parking along the
parallel
east
parking
side?
along the eastern
Okay,
edge there.
so
And I'm-
it's gone,
Pardon?
the barber shop.
Yep,
Oh, yeah.
yep.
Yep.
I think all the concrete that's
Okay.
currently there will be replaced.
All right, I just wanted to make sure I understood. All right. Anyone else to speak?
Can I make an additional comment?
You got a couple minutes left.
I got 2 minutes left, okay. Well, 2 minutes is probably appropriate, because earlier, before the picture came up, the word was said that this building would be set back 5 feet. Looking at the drawing, 2 minutes, 2 feet, there's no setback on that building. It's right up, pretty much right up to the sidewalk, and it's going to be a real visual obstacle.
Driving.
All right, thank you. If you think of anything else, you got 1:30 left.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Denise Hooksema, 17 West 13th. A lot of the things that are concerns have already been addressed. One of the things, not only with the setback from the sidewalk, but also the consistency with the character of the neighborhood. One thing, though, that maybe we were wondering about with the parking, there's the 3 spaces, but within the plan, it talked about 10 occupancy limit for the first floor retail. And so when I see that possibility, which maybe not, they may not use it immediately, but in the future, someone else could have some different ideas. Now you've got 3 parking spaces for, 10 people. So it seems like the street parking is gonna be used. And the parking there is already a problem at times. Coming from the other direction, going east on 13th, sometimes it's even hard to see around the parked cars to get onto Central. Now I see that happening from the other side. Got both sides parking, can't get hardly through. You get to the corner, now the building is closer to the sidewalk. Pull into the pedestrian walkway because you can't see, trying to get out. It just seems like increase in traffic and increase in parking could potentially become an issue. And I did have concerns about the proximity to that house next door. Seems like maybe that could become a problem in the future, especially if that narrow strip isn't maintained like maybe it should. I did notice too, and it was a question that I had, it mentioned a grease trap. And I wasn't really sure, to me that seems like it's more of a restaurant kind of thing, and I know that's not his plan, but if that's gonna be something there for someone to use in the future.
Typically, most commercial buildings have a separator,
Okay.
so that stuff doesn't go where it's not supposed to.
Okay,
So it can be pumped out rather than go down the storm sewer or the sanitary sewer. So it doesn't necessarily
To be
imply,
from the building.
it doesn't necessarily imply a use.
okay,
Restaurants do have additional grease traps, as I understand it. Typically, those are internal for them.
okay,
So don't read into that too
Anything.
much.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
It also gives an opportunity to monitor it.
Monitor it, yes, they do monitor them, so. Anyone else?
Is my travel time plus
No,
to the
we
5
don't,
minutes?
we don't. If it is, I'll take it out of his minute 30.
Thank you very much. My name is Gary Wickens. I'm husband of Marilyn, who was up here a little while ago. We live at 3 West 13th. And as I've been sitting and listening, and in the study session also, things have come up that just suggest things to me, like logical questions to be asking at a time when we're possibly nearly ready to approve, but are very real situations on the street. The setback concerned me, the 2 feet that I read is that also, just by the movement of people through the area, and especially since the warmed sidewalk is on our side now, but the overall foot traffic has increased. Bicycles, which maybe shouldn't be there, but dog walking, a lot of things. And just as an indicator in our yard, I can tell from time to time when the snow is on it, how wide the people actually walk to the given sidewalk. There's indication that as they pass each other, one group going one way, one another, there's a need for more room. And speaking of traffic, the one thing that concerned me was the fact of how does this integrate with tulip time? I don't think we're going to do away with that. I don't know if has staff or the developer contacted the police department to get input on this, because they routinely, and speaking from 4 years of ownership there and residency, they routinely block off that intersection quite often for things at the college, for foot running that actually winds up in a down where they put the inflatable end down by the Dow Center. Tulip time dancing, practice dancing up by the park. They block off the street at times for that. So they actually put a barrier on the north side of that cross. And at times they put barriers on the east side, the east side of that cross. I've not seen the south direction blocked, and I've not seen the west blocked, but the others are frequently and they could tell you, because they seem to have a routine to handle all these events and tulip time, and could probably speak to it a whole lot better than I could as to what the exact times are and the durations. Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Just one other comment.
Sure.
Just a caveat. It has a one-way drive through it, and I wonder too also in this inquiry of the officials here locally, if that coincides well with the movement of the traffic in that area. There are times when the cross traffic has to fight a little bit to get around the corner or get across or whatever. And that now has added an additional requirement on that everything going in there is going a certain way and coming out. And at times the 13th to the east is blocked off. And what does that do with what's left as their exit?
Very good, thank you. Anyone else? Come on down.
I'm Sarah Estelle. I live at 13 East 14th Street. So the proposed building is between, or in our eye shot, if we look towards Centennial Park. So the tulip time reference resonates with me. And in fact, a lot of the comments made here, I think, and questions are well taken. I want to just also suggest that we think long-term, even though we do have a number of rental properties in our neighborhood. including Laura's, that's not necessarily permanent. We've been encouraged, a family has moved in at the corner of 14th and Central to the west side, and that's exciting to us for those the Veniclassen brick homes that have been in disrepair. To see families move in is really kind of exciting. So I think where the building is located relative to the sidewalks, how that affects the view, how much pavement there is, affects how attractive our properties are to buyers who might like to live in the properties themselves. So I'd encourage the group to think long-term about maybe whether we might have more families or long-term residents move into the neighborhood. And I hope that we haven't taken too seriously the fact that that one white house happens to be renters right now, because there are a number of long-term homeowners on our block, and as we've heard tonight, on 13th Street as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
I guess I'll add to that, it's nothing set in stone, but my husband and I do have plans in the future that it's not out of the realm of possibility that we would move into that house. We may or may not change our minds depending on what comes there, but it's, like she said, just because it's a rental now doesn't mean that's always at least our intent.
Right. And just so you're aware, we treat all residents, regardless of owning, renting, the same in their concerns where they live and how things interact with them. This is a C1 zoned property. It's an oddball, grant you. If they came in and asked for this to be changed from RTRN to C1, we wouldn't do it. But we have a historical bit of zoning here we're dealing with. Everything he's doing on the site, with the exception of the waiver, you are allowed to do in C1. And it's kind of hard for us to say, you can't really, you have to move that this way and that way, because you're allowed to do that by right. Much like if you came in to build your home and you wanted to build it within the setback from your front yard, and we said, well, 2 houses down, they're back further, you gotta move yours back. We wouldn't do that either. So we gotta kind of treat everybody kind of equitable kind of way here. And appreciate the concerns and the comments. But there's a limited amount we can do relative to what we can disallow on a zoned property, and if they're meeting all the requirements, okay? We typically don't take into account short-term duration events. We've approved a lot of stuff right downtown where Tulip Time runs past the front door. And so everybody we've been here all long enough that we know how that works pretty much. So I think that we just can't go and say, because that street's closed on X percentage of days, it's got to be this way. They get accommodated. Everybody gets accommodated in some way, shape, or form. So I'm going to I'm going to close the public hearing. We're going to get a sense of where a commission is. I think some of you were here earlier and heard my thoughts on what we may do. We'll see what the desire of the majority of the commissioners are. So we're going to go ahead with that. I'm going to close the public hearing. Come on, you got one more chance.
Okay, I just was wondering if the idea of the setback is better introduced at the infill hearing.
Will they have a
There's
public
not a hearing.
There is not a hearing.
Not a hearing.
There's not a hearing
That's a
for that.
That
It's
would
a
be
staff.
That's a
letter-
staff
letter
function.
writing then. Okay, I'm sorry.
All right,
It's
no
okay.
problem. No problem. We like you to know what's going on and how it goes on, so you're good. I am going to close the public hearing, going once, twice, 3 times, reclosing the public hearing. Conversations among commission members, any questions for staff?
Yeah, I didn't know, Marvin, if I should have gone out there and asked my question, because yes, I do walk past that property every time we have a meeting here. And just wondering if I could suggest to the property owner that we might slide the house 10 feet to the south. Oh, I'm sorry, 8 feet to the south, so it's still within the setback requirements. That would bring the 2 feet to 10 feet, and at least try to meld with all the residences on 13th that you walk past getting here are between 12 and 20 feet from the property line.
From the sidewalk property.
From the
line.
sidewalk, right, from the sidewalk to the building. Anyway, just a thought to throw,
Which side of the building?
This would be the 13th Street side of the
Okay.
building. In other words, slide the building towards the bottom of the page, if everybody else has that visible.
Well,
Anyway.
we are voting, if we
I know.
vote on the site plan that's presented. If we were to table and they wish to amend that site plan, they may be able to do that. Amend the site plan if they so desire.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
I have a comment.
Go ahead, Brooke.
I think I'm more concerned about the west side of the building being so close to the sidewalk. We see that with the Family Dollar building. Granted, it's a much busier intersection, but I don't like seeing, especially a 3-foot tall building right next to the sidewalk. When you think about the sight line coming off of 13th and turning onto Central, you do have a bike lane there, which they are the most at-risk group of people besides the sidewalk. But with the I don't like the sight line, because you would have to pull into the pedestrian walkway to be able to see. That's my 2 cents.
Anyone else?
Do we expect to hear about the infill?
Not tonight. That
Would
was
it be-
my suggestion, potentially,
know,
you may
put
want to consider
Tabling this
Tabling
until
this
we hear from
for a
them.
date, to a date certain, that we know that the infill review will be done. And so you have that information to base part of your decision on at that time.
Do we know when that's gonna be done?
I'm sure before our next meeting.
I saw a note that the deadline, was that for public comment? The deadline was the 16th?
Yeah, I believe it's the 16th is when it will be reviewed on, so this week.
And then it
Thursday.
takes you a week to go through the formal process internally, or less?
No, it would be done on the 6th,
It'll be done on the 16th.
Yep. the
So it'll be
review would
readily
complete.
available for the February
Yes.
meeting. So, if there were a tabling motion, I would hope you would make it to a date certain. We
It
get
would
that,
be, yep, it'd be February 11 would be our next.
okay?
Before we table, I agree with Brooke. I think, when I'm looking at this, I know what is currently zoned, and the comment that if the recommendation or has come to change it from residential to the C1, we will not allow that, but we are dealing with the parameters that were given at the time. I think a 2-foot setback for me, especially at that critical intersection, it definitely doesn't allow for enough access, both for pedestrians, for the person in the car, traffic coming through. It involves a little bit more of dangerous situation that could occur if we allow a little bit more of a setback. It does allow up to 10. I would be a little more comfortable allowing it to see it further from both sides, both from the north and from the west. The size and scope of the building, I mean, it is allowed, and I am a little more torn now between that southern end regarding a permanent structure like a fence or trees. Hearing from a lot of the residents, they do like more of the community feel, so trees would definitely be beneficial, just knowing that it's gonna take a little bit of time to get to that height that everybody would like, so it is a trade-off, that I'm there.
Just to be devil's advocate, how is this intersection any different than Central and Ninth? Where you have a building that's right up to the property lines on both corners?
It used to be a bank? You're talking about that
You-
building?
Well, depending on how long you've lived here, it used to be a bowling alley, but,
I'm not that old.
okay, yeah. It was,
Ottawa Savings Bank was the last thing I saw there.
Yeah,
But
no,
that
no.
building is right on the sidewalk?
he's
that's at
talking-
River. That's
he's talking-
the brick building, there's bike shop was in it for a
West
while.
Michigan Bike Shop.
You're thinking
You're
10th?
talking Ninth and Central?
Cent-
Yeah.
Yes.
You're thinking 10th
Yeah.
and Central?
Yeah,
Yeah, it used to
Central.
be Ottawa Savings Bank.
Yeah,
No,
and
no,
the-
no,
and
no,
the
that's
public
the other
restrooms
corner.
across the street. The
He's
public
talking
restrooms to the west.
He's talking northeast corner.
Gotcha,
You
sorry.
close the public, but my office is actually on the 2nd floor of that building, and so I can tell you from experience, I will not cross on that crosswalk, I cross on the other. It's actually very dangerous. Drivers cannot see,
Okay,
and I see it every day.
I appreciate that. My office is on the second floor of 8th Street, so,
Okay.
Yes.
all right. Any other comments?
Yeah, I think I'm on board with tabling as well. I want to make a general comment that seems pretty obvious, but just so everyone thinks about it. Rezoning is a thing that we can do. So I hear the owner likes this location and wants really quiet commercial. The quietest commercial is residential, So I just want to put that out there if that's something the owner would want to consider.
Yeah, we generally don't rezone without the owner asking.
Sure,
Yeah.
but it sounds like the feedback from everyone involved, it would make sense.
The neighborhood, yeah.
Well, are we, is somebody ready to make a motion?
Sure. I'd like to make a motion to table this discussion until after we hear from infill review. So we would come back to this on our February 11th meeting.
Okay, so you're tabling to a date certain, February 11th, is that correct?
Correct.
Is there support for that motion?
I'd support that.
Okay. Mallory, just because Jen is not here, we'll do a roll call. Oh, yeah? I'm being,
DeBock,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Blunt,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Lozano,
Yes.
Martin.
yes,
All right, vote passes.
thank you. Communications and petitions. You can leave, although it's gonna get a little fun here in a little bit. This is my last meeting after 6 years, so it's gonna get a little interesting. Are there any scheduling of public hearings at this point in time that we should be aware of? That we need to schedule?
Not that I'm aware
Marvin,
of.
wait, hold on. Can you explain what the tabling means?
We're done talking about it. We'll bring it back on the.
It's not approved whatsoever.
It's
at
not
this
approved
point.
whatsoever.
Right.
We tabled it, we'll come back on the 11th. Whoever happens to be chairing at that point in time can open the public hearing back up if need be. And you can do all this again.
Mhm. Okay. Thanks.
Any scheduling of public hearings?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Communications from commission members? Okay, I do.
Well, I
Thanks,
was going to
Marvin.
say, thank you for your years of service.
I've always threatened to do this, and I'm gonna do it. And I'm sorry that we're missing our colleagues here. We spent a lot of time a few weeks ago talking about how far things were apart and blocks and stuff like that. And so, Anglo-Saxon England, there was people who plowed and did furrows for a living on a contract basis. And they had to determine distance, and so they would go as far as an ox would get until they got tired. And that, how long that furrow was became a furlong. That's what a furlong is. And the distance the other way, they used to use a goad to make the ox move, and that was a rod, and that became a rod. So we had rods and furlongs. About 1620, a Welsh clergyman, astronomer, geometrician, mathematician, said, we've got to standardize this stuff. His name was Edmund Gunter. And he developed a system of a chain. Chain had 100 links. And you measured out the 100 links. And that chain was 66 feet long. And that was, when you divided that by 4, you got 16 and a half. And he called the 16 and a half a rod. And so that became the standardized thing in the use in England. And that's where really all this comes from. Thomas Jefferson was aware of all this stuff and wanted to start surveying the rest of the country because he wanted to give it away to people. And so they adopted that same system of using Gunter's chain. Gunter was kind of a clever guy. He also came up with something called Gunter's scale, which was the reason we have slide rules, if you still use a slide rule at any point in time just for amusement, and several other things. But his claim to fame is Gunter's chain. The chain is 66 feet long. And so if you're into planning and doing stuff like that, 66 feet becomes a thing. All of our normal street right-of-ways in Holland are 66 feet wide. So 8th, 9th, 10th, and the other streets are 66 feet wide. Now here's where it gets kind of interesting. And maybe I was hoping Mark would be here, but apparently not. Yeah. So one chain wide, 66 feet, by 10 chains long, 660 feet. Can you do that math for me? 43,560. What does that number mean to you? It's an acre. So that's where that comes from. Now, a city block is the short blocks are 660 feet from right-of-way to right-of-way, and 330 feet that way, right? So 330 divided by 66? 5. So a standard city block is 5 acres big. So that's a good way to think about how big things are when you sit there and judge them, okay? Yeah, all right. 660 feet is also the current definition for a furlong. So if you got kids and take them for a walk, you can count how many furlongs you're going. So you can amuse them somehow, okay? So, but that system was adopted throughout the United States as part of the public land surveying system. And, oh, another one. How many feet in a mile? Divide that by 66. 80 chains. So a square mile is 80 chains by 80 chains, right? Okay. 80 times 80 is 640? Okay. 640. Yeah, so, okay, so 640, and we know it's 10 square chains to an acre, so that's 640 acres. That's a section. Some of you may have heard of sections before, and that's typically how we develop things. 6 sections by 6 sections is a township, as they're ranged out in the state of Michigan. What else is neat about that? When you lay out sections and you start from a particular place in the state, across the United States, there's 37 north and south lines called meridians. One of them runs through Michigan, which we use. And in the state of Michigan, they had to adopt a baseline where they would start that point and measure it. That is actually located just southwest of a little town called Leslie, Michigan, in the southeast corner of the state. You can go down there and you can find a park, and then remarkably, it's located at the corner of Baseline Road and Meridian Road. And that is a starting point in the city, for the state of Michigan. So I always find that kind of amusing. So that 66 feet is kind of real important. And so when we talk about how far the fire department has to go and how you judge things, now you can hopefully have some kind of frame of reference that says, that's what that means. And if you've been paying attention and can do some inference, I'm going to ask a question. What is the regulation distance between wickets on a cricket pitch? Oh, come on, you're not all this dense. 66 feet. There you go. There's your cocktail trivia. So there's my little jaunt down memory lane there for you. I think it's important to know from whence things come. And when we look at ordinances and things like that, I always want to try and figure out why they did it. Because typically it's in there for a reason. And we just shouldn't be cavalier in throwing it out and see if those reasons still hold. I first got involved in city boards and commissions when I complained to my council member back in the mid-'80s about something, and he wanted to put me on ZBA. And I think I've done 12 years on ZBA. This will be 12 years on Planning Commission. I've been on every housing commission that's been done. I was on the abrupted last Civic Center when we found out that Hope was going to build a field house. That was abrupted. It's been very rewarding for me. I've really enjoyed it a lot. I've met some really great people. And I'm going to put this in the back of your heads. People who show up make a difference. Some people say people who show up make the rules. But every month, this board in some way, this commission in some way or form, decides physically what we think this community should look like and how it should reflect what we think it should look like. It's usually a fairly messy process, but I encourage you to get involved in it in some way, shape, or form. There's lots of opportunities for volunteerism at the city, and you can find a board or commission that does the thing for you. So with that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there support?
Support.
All those in favor signify by saying you get what you zone for.
You get what you zone for.
Thank you. Have a great time.
Thanks, Marvin.
Marvin, thank you.
Thank you.